The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to this joint ILX and AXELOS ITIL 4 webinar. Thank you for joining. Today we're going to be discussing what's changing with the new ITIL 4 syllabus and how this can benefit your organisation. This is a re-record of a previous webinar that we've done, so the timelines may be slightly different now, but all of the information within the webinar is very much still relevant. We'll be having a brief Q&A session at the end, so if you have any queries, if there are any queries during the webinar, then make sure you listen until the end. But without further ado, I will now hand over to Akshay.
Thanks, Alice, and thanks for setting this up again. Hopefully, we won't have or GoToWebinar won't have any audio issues this time around. So, what I'm going to be talking about today is what's ITIL 4. I'm going to give you a sneak peek at some of the new concepts and models and so on that we've now launched as part of ITIL 4 Foundation. Now, originally, this webinar was first done back in January, so it was done before ITIL 4 went live. And obviously, now that it's a live product, there's a lot more information that we can talk about. But here, I'll be going over sort of the highlights of ITIL 4. So, first introductions, that's me. That is literally the only blazer I own, so you will see me wearing that blazer in many, many photographs on social media platforms. I'm the ITIL product ambassador at AXELOS, which means I get to work with lovely people like Alice over at ILX in doing things like these webinars, attending their conferences, doing other sort of events with these training providers and consultancies. Outside of work, I'm a huge comic book fan, as well as a fan of hard rock and heavy metal. So if anyone has any questions about any of those sorts of topics, they can always reach me on Twitter, and that's my Twitter handle, @blowboy. I was asked to preface my talk on what's new with ITIL 4 with some general information about what ITIL is, for those of you who might be listening in or watching who aren't really familiar with the service management domain. So ITIL is the most adopted IT service management framework in the world. It's important to note that it is a framework. It's not a prescriptive methodology, despite what you may have heard. It delivers value to customers through the management of services. And in ITIL 4, we talk a lot about what it means to be a service or a service provider and how value comes through in the form of services. In previous iterations of ITIL, we use some specific language which is changing slightly with ITIL 4, but in a sense, ITIL has always allowed organizations to integrate their IT service strategy with the strategy of the business in order to best meet customer needs. And it enables the adoption of a standard approach to service management. Now, the standard approach term is a loaded one. It's a standard approach for your organization. It allows you to understand how work needs to be done and put in place a standard approach where appropriate. But obviously, keep in mind that your standard approach might be different from the company next door. ITIL's been around for the last, I would say, 30 years, I think. Certainly very close to the number 30. And we believe through various calculations, looking at exam volumes and so on, that we have close to 2.1 million, I think it was, last time I checked, practitioners around the world. Those are fine folks such as yourself who are working in end-user organizations adapting and adopting ITIL guidance. It includes trainers, consultants, thought leaders, and so on. And ITIL can be found in 90% of Fortune 500 organizations. So it's very well adopted around the world, and there is a large community out there. In ITIL version 3, the guidance was structured around what was called the service lifecycle. It was meant to be an operating model, not an organizational model, that described the various phases of a life cycle that a service would go through. So there's, of course, the sort of initiation of the strategy aspect of the service lifecycle, where you understand who your customers are, what are your patterns of business activity, what's the demand going to look like, putting in place the levers needed to manage that demand. The next phase, if I can use that word loosely, would be design, where you design the service for appropriate requirements of quality, cost, risk. This is typically where you'd look at capacity or information security or continuity, service level management, and so on. And once the service has been built or designed and built, there's usually a phase in the life cycle of a service where you're making that service live. You're moving it out of a development state into a live state. So bringing new servers online, deploying code, releasing new functionality to customers. These are all things that would during service transition. And once the service was live, you would operate it and you would support it. And so in the service operations, we talked about things like managing incidents or managing outages, managing requests, and so on. There's an outer ring to this model, which is continual service improvement. The philosophy is that as a service provider, we should always be looking at improving the way we operate our services, but also the way in which we interact with customers or design these services, support these services, and so on. The most recent publication in the ITIL v3 library is ITIL Practitioner. This was released in 2016. It focused on what were called 9 guiding principles, which were recommendations on how to work, sort of a philosophy of service management, if you will. It talked a bit more about continuous service improvement, but it also provided a lot of really good guidance around communication and stakeholder management, managing organizational change, as well as development of good metrics and measurements. And so before I go on to ITIL 4, I just want to highlight a couple of case studies that we've published recently. I think the first one, which is Spotify, was published in January. And Spotify being one of those unicorns or type organizations, it's not a place that you would traditionally look for service management guidance being adopted. We tend to think of Spotify as a very product-centric company. But the case study goes into some of the driving forces behind the adoption of ITIL. Pre-IPO, there was a need to put in place some form of discipline around the way work was being recognized, planned, and executed. And they looked to ITIL to provide them with the guidance to help them get started. And they've been quite successful in their adoption of ITIL, and I believe they've even started taking ITIL foundation courses, so it's quite a good case study to really get into. And the second one is a former energy or utilities company called Statoil, which is now called Equinor. And they've taken ITIL outside of IT service management and starting to adopt it in various other shared services. And you can see on the slide that there's some of the sort of stats, which I don't have to read for you. But it's also a really interesting case study of how the same principles of the management of IT services can also be applied to the management of non-IT services. And that, I think, is actually a thread that we continue to see through ITIL 4. Now, ITIL 4, the latest evolution in the framework, certainly does provide a lot of good guidance couched in the language of IT, because that's where ITIL has come from. But what we've also done with ITIL 4 is present many concepts and terminology which relates to service management. So it's not specifically to IT, but more generic concepts about what is value, how do we manage risks, or how do we recognize and manage risks, how do we recognize and manage costs, what are outcomes, what's the difference between service and a product. These are not specific to IT services, and so we feel that there's a platform here with ITIL 4 where organizations can use the IT service management framework successfully outside of the IT domain. But nonetheless, we retain the IT flavor in the core guidance. And we've been working on this guidance for the last, I should say, last 15 months. We announced the update program at the Fusion conference in the States in September 2017, I believe. And since then, we've had several workshops, surveys, face-to-face interviews with various practitioners, end users, all the way up to CIOs, consultants and trainers included. And we've gone through a series of iterative development cycles where we've written some of the guidance and created some of the models. We've tested them with these practitioner community. We've updated them following the feedback that we've received. And then finally, starting in the summer, we developed the exams. And in Q4, we went around doing some beta testing, trainer readiness, and so on. So the folks from ILX, for example, were trained back in November 2018, and they sat their exams then, which allowed them to now be able to offer classes to all of you wonderful people. So some of the key facts of ITIL 4. We have a new product architecture. So the service lifecycle concept still exists, but it's not really at the forefront of what ITIL 4 is. So we have a new architecture, a new way of describing things, new models, new concepts. And with that, we therefore have a new structure of the publications, as well as a new qualification scheme to go along with it. One of the things I've often been asked is, what is ITIL's place in the modern IT organization? We hear a lot of different frameworks being thrown back and forth, Agile, DevOps, IT for IT, and so on. And so what is ITIL's place in this whole thing? Some people feel that ITIL should be the single framework that absorbs everything else and shows a unified way of working. Other people feel that ITIL is limited only to the service desk and infrastructure. That's not a perspective I share, and certainly it's not a perspective that the folks at AXELOS share. And the best way I can describe ITIL's place in the modern IT organization is to use the analogy of, from my own personal background, I'm an enthusiastic killer of plants, otherwise known as an amateur gardener. And in my garden, I have a few trellises lined up against various walls and surfaces. I really do wish that some of these pictures here represented what my garden looks like. Sadly, my garden is much, much smaller and not quite as glamorous. But I have several trellises, which are foundational structures which have a shape that I believe will be pleasing in my garden. And on these structures, I affix various pins and wiring and twine and so on, upon which I train my plants so that when they bloom, when they bear fruit, even, they create a pleasing visual. They add value to the garden. And so for me, ITIL is very much like that trellis. It defines the shape of the service organization. It connects the various components of the service organization. And upon that trellis, upon that connective tissue, we can affix the various bits of, I like to call scaffolding, the other frameworks which are directed to specific use cases, project management frameworks, software development frameworks like various flavors of Agile or DevOps, risk management frameworks, governance frameworks, and so on. And using these frameworks, using the scaffolding, we're able to grow and train our products and services so that when they are realized or when they bear fruit, literally, they create value in the eyes of the customers and sponsors and consumers in general. So ITIL for me is very much that foundational trellis of the service provider. And so what that means is we need to change the language of service delivery. And in ITIL 4, we've made a small but very significant change. The current language of service delivery, of service management, is that of service delivery, which says that the service provider performs some actions and he has delivered value. I've been around the world several times, talked to multiple customers, and almost universally, everyone's used the phrase delivering value. But when we actually study the supply chain that quote unquote delivers value, what we come to realize is actually value is co-created, and it can be co-created with multiple stakeholders. Which is to say, we still have the service provider, we still have the concept of value, but we need to recognize all the other stakeholders that have an interest in that value. Now, clearly, the customer is the most important. Without the customer, we wouldn't be in business. But there might be other stakeholders like regulators or suppliers for whom value must also be realized through the service. And so we find that value is co-created via a service relationship, a transaction in a relationship. And that value is distributed amongst these multiple stakeholders. You could argue that the customer grabs the lion's share of that value, but smaller elements of that value that's co-created could also be passed along to all these other stakeholders. And it's important to realize that these stakeholders might not even participate in the service relationship. For example, when I pay a bill using my mobile banking app, my government regulator in the UK does not participate in that bill payment, but they derive value from it because they're able to ensure compliance against regulation and so on. So once we recognize these multiple stakeholders, we needed a way to describe these multiple stakeholders and their effects on the service provider. And so we created this model called the 4 dimensions of service management. And what this model talks about is 4 design considerations or 4 resource types a service provider has at its disposal in order to create the products and services which ultimately co-create value. So these resources or these design considerations are organizations and people, information technology, partners and suppliers, value streams and processes. Now, the numbers on the diagram that you see are not meant to be an order of priority. It's just that when we had a version of this diagram without the numbers, people didn't quite understand what which the 4 dimensions referred to. Having said that, I think it's absolutely lovely that organizations, people got number 1. And so we have an outer ring around these 4 dimensions, which represent the influence of these various stakeholders that I talked about earlier. And this influence can constrain or encourage the service provider to act in certain ways. So you could have political constraints or political influences, economic ones, social, technological, legal, and environmental. The outer ring uses the acronym PESTLE, P-S-T-L-E, from the business analysis world. So these 4 dimensions don't exist in isolation. They interact in a myriad of ways. So for example, when you're developing a RACI matrix, you're describing an aspect of organizations and people, as well as value stream and processes. The factors that you see around the outside influence each of the 4 dimensions as well as how they interact. Now, this model can be applied at the level of the service. So in order to create my banking app, I need to understand my organization, the skills I have, the various tools I need to use, the partners I might need to contract with, and so on. But it can also describe how we design or manage our service management capabilities. So when describing my incident management capability or my service desk capability, I need to be able to talk about the organizations and the people and the culture and the skills, the types of tools I need, the partners I need to contract with, and so on. So it works at both levels. Once we define this, we ask ourselves, well, what are the various components of a service provider organization? And we created a systems level view of service management. And in this system, we have 5 key components. We've got the guiding principles that I'd referred to before. And in ITIL 4, they've gone through a little bit of an iteration, and we can see a few changes on the subsequent slide. We have governance, which is how the organization evaluates, directs, and monitors its performance. We have the service value chain, which I'll come to in a couple of slides, which is a set of loosely connected activities that any service provider undertakes. You have practices, which for now I will describe as the ITIL v3 processes on steroids. And then we have continual improvement, which is a relentless focus on making sure that all aspects of the system are improved. So continual improvement, what used to be referred to as continuous service improvement, here's continual improvement. It's not just for the services or the processes, it's also for the guiding principles, continual improvements of governance, and so on. And so this systems level view helps us understand the various components that the service provider needs to convert opportunities or demand for work into value for one or more stakeholders. Very briefly, talking about the guiding principles, as I said, these were service management philosophies or recommendations on how to work or how to approach work. As I said, there are 7 of them. Many of them carried forward from ITIL Practitioner. They got chopped and changed a little bit, and we have a new one for ITIL 4. So I just want to pick out a couple. Focus on value is very much like what lean practitioners have been doing for many, many years. We've expanded the scope of this a little bit more. So lean and agile practitioners tend to talk about value for the customer. And if an activity is not generating value for the customer, then we should be looking at doing away with it. With ITIL, as we just talked about, there can be multiple stakeholders who seek to derive value from the service relationship. And so when we focus on value, we're really asking ourselves, does this activity create value for at least one stakeholder? If it's not, then why are we doing it? And framing the question in this way allows us to have the discussion that, I know that this particular activity does not generate value for a customer, but it's allowing the organization to pay its suppliers, or it's allowing the organization to maintain compliance with government regulations. And so it's important, which then leads to a question of, well, how can we make this activity simple, practical, remove the friction or the overhead of that step? Progress iteratively with feedback is something that agile practitioners have been doing a long time. And we feel that a lot of those concepts and techniques are very much applicable to service management as well, where changes to services or service management can be approached in iterations or small time-boxed iterations, small enough as needs be, of course. And then we need to encourage the creation of feedback loops and paying attention to the feedback to understand if the changes we're making continue to enable the service provider to create value. The new guiding principle in ITIL 4 is optimize and automate. And really the story here is that we need to understand what our workflow is, what is our value stream or our process, and we need to optimize it as much as we can before we look at automation as a way of removing human intervention from simple repetitive tasks. So I like to joke that before joining AXELOS, most of my life was that of a consultant, and 99% of my projects used to be automate then optimize, which was really the wrong way around. Because it involves more work later on to unpick the bits that you didn't want in the first place. So optimize and automate helps practitioners understand that they need to work things out on paper or using manual steps initially until they've gotten the workflow or the process down to a point where they can say, these bits can be automated, but we still need human judgment or human intervention for those bits. The service value chain, as I mentioned, was central to the service value system. I think I described it earlier as a set of 6 loosely coupled activities. And these activities are common to all types of service providers, regardless of your size, regardless of what domain or what sort of technologies you use. At some point, as a service provider, whether you're a person or the entire enterprise, you will be engaging with external stakeholders. You will be planning work. You will be delivering and supporting live services, and so on. So this is definitely a scalable model. Again, it's an operating model. It's not an organizational model. You can have one person who's engaging, planning, delivering, and so on. You can have an entire enterprise where teams are focused, for example, on engaging with customers and planning work. For example, those might be business analysts. Or your PMO. You could have people who are busy delivering and supporting live services while looking at opportunities on improving them. So it's very much an operating model. It's not meant to be an organizational model. But once we understand this concept, we're able to define value streams, which is also a new concept in ITIL 4. Value streams are essentially journeys through the service value chain. And a value stream always starts with demand, it always ends at value. So we don't have value streams that just sit on the inside of the service value chain, these sort of collaboration workflow, collaboration methodologies, if you will. What we're really interested in is what are the steps needed to convert demand into value. And using this model, we can, for example, draw workflows or value streams. So for example, let's talk about what it might take to introduce a new service component. Well, I could start with, sorry, went a bit too far. So I could start with engaging with my demand before doing a bit of planning to understand the ROI, the feasibility, have go, no-go decisions. And assuming it's a go, I might then choose to continue to collaborate with my customers and other stakeholders to design the service component to the right level of quality and cost and timeliness and so on. After which I would try to go out and either obtain or internally build the service component. And again, there may be several feedback loops with customers and other stakeholders between obtain, build, and engage, essentially, so that I'm iterating or refining my way to the right service component. Once I've obtained that component, I then transition it into a live state. And once it's live, I start delivering and supporting that new service component. And that creates a valuable or increases the value of the live product or service which customers are interacting with to go create value. Another example could be, for example, the development and deployment of a hotfix to a customer. And that value stream might look something like this. So I start out by engaging with a customer who's calling in to say something's wrong. I go into deliver and support, where I do my initial investigation and diagnosis. I realize that I need to develop a hotfix, a piece of code to resolve the issue. I then go to obtain build, where I go through my development lifecycle, the articulation of needs, the development of the code, the testing of the code, automated or manual or user acceptance testing, whatever the case may be. Once the hotfix is ready, I might need to perform certain tasks to deploy that, transition it into a live state. And at that point, I go back into deliver and support, where I check that the hotfix has resolved the issue. Assuming it has, I now have a product and service whose value has been restored and can now continue to co-create value as intended. So value streams are a very powerful concept. It allows us to understand what activities or what sequence of activities are needed in order to convert demand into value. And supporting the value stream are practices. Now, I've said before that practices were kind of like the V3 processes on steroids. The formal definition of a practice is up on the slide here. It's a way of working or a way in which work must be done. So it's more than just the steps needed. It also needs to be able to articulate the management hierarchy or the organizational design that might be needed, the culture, the skills and competencies needed, the various processes, of course, but also what sort of information might I need in order to execute this practice. What are the tools or the technologies I might need? How do I interface with partners and suppliers in order to deliver the outcomes needed? So practices are very much the sort of process plus, if you will. And practices contribute to these activities. So for example, the change control practice would contribute quite heavily to improving service components. It could contribute very heavily to obtaining or building service components of the design and transition activities, as well as delivery and support activities. It might contribute to a lesser extent in engaging with external stakeholders or even the planning of work. So each of these activities in the service value chain can draw on one or more practice in order to achieve the outcomes needed. I'll give you another example. When on the service desk, I need to, or customer support team, I need to engage with somebody who's calling in to report an issue, I would need to draw upon the service desk practice, which would provide me with the skills or the empathy, perhaps even some tools to help help understand the customer's issues. I might draw upon the incident management practice to access tools and techniques to log the issue, to prioritize or classify the issue, to understand how to attend to first line resolution, or how to escalate the issue. So each of these activities that you see on the service value chain, engage, plan, improve, and so on, they all draw upon the practices underpinning the service value chain in the SVS plan. So just to wrap up some of these key concepts, ITIL 4 in general takes a much more of a holistic view of service management than ITIL version 3 did. We're able to bring in a lot more practices and a lot more guidance from disparate fields which weren't necessarily explicitly addressed in ITIL v3, such as project management or architecture management or excuse me, risk management. And so it represents a tremendous evolution, not just in terms of scope, but also in terms of the concepts that it brings to the fore. Concepts like the co-creation of value, the service relationship, the need to pay attention to cultures and skills of the people. And through the service value chain, through the flexibility offered in these models, through the philosophies or the recommendations on how to work that the guiding principles articulate, ITIL 4 is very much in a position to align with newer ways of working like Agile, DevOps, as well as other established ways of working like COBIT or ISO standards or governance domains. So I mentioned that the new models allowed us to simplify the content structure as well as the certification structure. So what you see here on the slide is the qualification scheme, but it also serves as our publication scheme. We're right now in March 2019. We've just gone live with ITIL Foundation. That's its own book with its own course and exam. And you can speak to the lovely people at ILX about scheduling something, a course for yourself. After the foundation module, we have two work streams, the managing professional work stream, as well as the strategic leader work stream. The managing professional work stream has 4 modules in it, which you can see: create, deliver, support, drive stakeholder value, high velocity IT, and direct, plan, and improve. Completing these 4 modules, which is to say, passing the assessments, going on the course, passing the assessments, automatically gives you the designation of managing professional. Now, this is different from the V3 qualification scheme, where you took a set of intermediate courses which made you eligible for a capstone course, Managing Across the Lifecycle, and completing the capstone course and the exam gave you the designation of ITIL expert. Now we removed the need for that capstone course with ITIL 4, and so completing the 4 managing professional modules will automatically give you the designation of ITIL managing professional. Similarly, in the strategic leader track, we have 2 modules, and completing these 2 modules will give you the designation of strategic leader. Now, there is one module which is common to both managing professional and strategic leader. It's the one that's shaded dark blue on the slide, direct plan and improve. Now, this is a module that needs to be taken just once, and if you successfully complete the assessment, you are able to count that in both work streams, both the managing professional and the strategic leader. So you only take it once. Obtaining the managing professional and strategic leader designations makes you eligible to apply to be an ITIL master. We haven't announced any changes to the ITIL Masters program as of March 2019, but we're looking at ways in which we can make the Masters program more accessible and more worth the time and investment needed to achieve that capstone designation. There is one transition module that allows people in the V3 qualification world who have obtained 17 points or higher. So to put it another way, people who are eligible to do MALP or people who are already ITIL experts, these folks can take the Managing Professional Transition module. It'll be its own training course and an assessment at the end of it. And completing that assessment successfully will automatically give you the designation of Managing Professional. So you don't need to do the underlying 4 courses individually. But again, this is for people who have 17 points in today's in the V3 scheme, or people who are already ITIL experts. Now, once you transition across and you get the Managing Professional designation, we give you credit for knowing or understanding and learning the concepts that we would have focused on in direct plan and improve, which would count in the strategic leader work stream. And therefore, there's one course remaining for today's ITIL experts or people who transition across to be professional, and that's the ITIL leader module. And completing that ITIL leader module will get you the strategic leader designation. So for people with the 17 points today or who are ITIL experts today, you've got 2 courses that you're potentially looking at. You've got the Managing Professional Transition, and which will give you the MP designation, as well as the ITIL Strategist, Direct Plan and Improve qualification or credit for that, having done that. You then take the ITIL Leader module, complete that, you've gotten the Strategic Leader designation. You've got both designations after 2 courses. There is no transition or bridge course at a foundation level. So if you have just ITIL V3 Foundation and you don't plan to go further, or if you've got ITIL V3 Foundation plus a certain number of intermediates but not enough to make you eligible for the transition module, and you have no desire to go further, then the path for these candidates, these delegates, is to take the ITIL 4 Foundation exam. There is no bridge, there is no transition at a foundation level. I hope that at this point in the webinar, you've seen that there are so many new concepts in ITIL 4 that we can't really bridge people across. The delta is too large to be able to create a bridge. You're better off taking the foundation training or foundation course and the foundation exam. If you have ITIL V3 Foundation plus a certain number of ITIL V3 intermediates, my sincere recommendation would be to get to 17 points, take additional intermediates, get to 17 points, which makes you eligible for the Managing Professional Transition. Now, we're hard at work developing all of the Managing Professional and Strategic Leader modules, and so our plan, I had a timeline slide there. Our plan is to release Managing Professional modules, the strategic leader modules, as well as the managing professional transition in the second half of 2019. So, with ITIL 4, we have introduced a model where we're able to pull forward some of the really good stuff in ITIL v3, refresh the parts that needed refreshing, creating a framework that allows for easy working with Lean, Agile, and DevOps. It provides a wider context for service providers to understand the context of digital transformation, of what it means to be a service provider in this digital economy, which therefore allows faster delivery of services, faster creation of value at a higher quality, because we have this holistic view of what it means to be a service provider. Oh, and here's the timeline slide. So we've just launched Foundation. As I said, we're working on the core and supplementary guidance for the managing professional and strategic leader tracks. So if you do want to get involved, either to provide advice of what you'd like to see, or even to do some of the writing or creating some of the supplementary content like case studies or white papers, or blogs to support some of the guidance that we'll be publishing in the second half of this year, please do get in touch. You can get in touch with me. You can reach out to the fine folks at ILX and they'll put you in touch with me as well. There are multiple routes to get to the AXELOS product development team. And if you're interested in taking part, I strongly encourage you to reach out. And with that, it's back to Alice.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Akshay, for sharing that with us. Very interesting. I hope everyone has enjoyed this webinar and that you found it useful. We're going to move into just a brief Q&A session now before the end. Our ILX contact details are on the screen now, so we'll leave those up for you. But actually, I'm going to fire a few questions at you. Sure. The first one, we've had someone ask, the value stream is quite linear from external demand to service value. Is there any scope for iterative innovation and ideas generation from within the service organization, e.g. innovative new service, not just CSI?
Sure. So the service value chain, let's go back a few slides to show the diagram. So the service value, I'll stay on this slide. The service value chain is not meant to be a linear representation of how you would go from demand to value. As I said, it's a set of 6 loosely coupled activities, and I would hope that by talking about things like value streams, we're able to understand how we combine these various activities, how we sequence these various activities to achieve the required degree of agility or understand at a very macro level how we innovate our products and services, how we create new service components, how we introduce these products and services, and so on. So it's not meant to be a linear representation of work by any means. We've tried through the development cycles last year, we tried several ways of trying to showcase these concepts in a far more, if I could say, far more of a dynamic way, trying to show all the feedback loops and so on. But ultimately, it got to be a very, very messy diagram, and it was very difficult to explain. And so this was the sort of happy medium that we found to talk about the various activities and represent them in a way that we can talk about as an operating model, a loosely coupled set of activities, rather than a linear, sequential, waterfall way of doing things.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Okay, so the next question we've had through is, you talk about a holistic approach and co-creation. This seems to apply mainly to customers and suppliers. So what's the place of ESM in ITIL 4? For example, the cooperation with other service departments such as facility, HR, finance, etc., to deliver great services?
That's a great question. So I definitely believe that all these departments that were mentioned, they can play the role of a service provider. They can also play the role of a stakeholder who has some need from the co-creation of value. So, for example, when I am delivering services as a service provider and interacting with my customers as in the form of some sort of a service relationship, and we're both co-creating value, I still need to be able to report on, let's say, running costs back to my finance team. I need to be able to ensure that my staff have a good working environment. So that's when I work with facilities. Equally, you could look at facilities or finance as a service provider into the organization, who interact with other stakeholders within the service organization or external to that organization to co-create value. So as a facilities provider, I would interact with all the people working in a particular location to make sure that they have adequate lighting, heating, water, comfortable desks and chairs, and a comfortable environment to work with, resolve issues quickly, and so on. And this relationship I have with all these users of my facilities is what co-creates value. But at the same time, I might need to, for example, outsource cleaning to a certain company, or outsource plant care to a company. And so they would be my supplier. I might have certain health and safety standards that I have to comply to and demonstrate compliance against. And so I need to make sure that through the execution of these various activities that my facilities team undertakes, I'm able to capture adequate data to be able to demonstrate compliance against these policies, pay my suppliers, or direct my suppliers, as the case may be, and so on. So the model of co-creation of value is not just limited to IT service management. As I said in the beginning of the call, beginning of the webinar, sorry, we've introduced a number of non-IT specific concepts of service management, which we hope ESM service providers, facilities, finance, marketing, and so on, can pick up on this way of thinking and start to explore how they can view themselves as a service provider as well.
Brilliant, great. Okay, so the next question down the list we've got is, how long do we have left to complete our V3 service lifecycle or service capability intermediate courses so that they can be used as points for transitioning to version 4?
I think, so the best way of answering that question is we haven't announced any retirement dates as of yet, but there will be a smooth and orderly sunsetting period. We're not going to turn things off overnight, literally. I believe with Foundation, ITIL V3 Foundation will continue to be offered until mid-2020, I believe. And you can expect a similar sunsetting period for all the ITIL V3 intermediates. I sadly don't have any fixed dates or time periods that I can provide now, but please rest assured that when we launch all the Managing Professional and Strategic Leader modules, we won't be turning off ITIL V3 intermediates overnight. There will be a retirement period, there will be a sunsetting period, which will allow delegates to continue to take those courses and exams and to make them eligible for the transition module.
Okay, great. Thank you, Akshay. And the next question we've got is, will there be any topics from Prince 2 or Prince 2 Agile within ITIL 4?
So one of the practices we have, just quickly flip to that slide. One of the practices that we have in ITIL 4 is project management. And that's to say that we recognize the need for project management. We recognize the impact of project management on the design, creation, and operations of products and services. That's not to say that we're going to recreate Prince 2 or Prince 2 Agile within ITIL. And that sort of philosophy, that sort of approach extends outside of just project management. So Risk management is a practice, but we're not trying to recreate COVID. Software development and management is a practice, but we're not trying to recreate Agile. So this approach seems to work well. We recognize the need for these various capabilities, and we understand the impact of these capabilities on the products and services that the organization manages. But we also direct practitioners to other frameworks where they can get more granular information on the various methods or techniques that they can apply.
Okay, cool. Great, thank you. Next question we've got is, has the format of the foundation exam changed? So is it still 40 multiple choice questions?
It's 40 multiple choice questions. I believe it's a 1-hour exam. I think if you're a non-native English speaker, you have 75 minutes, I think, for the exam. The exams, the course, the material, the guidance, the exams, they'll all be translated into several other languages: German, French, Polish, Japanese, and so on. And as we get closer to locking down release dates for those, AXELOS will be communicating those launch plans around the world. So stay tuned to axelos.com or AXELOS's social media channels, Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, to understand when these translations will be released.
Okay, cool. And then the final question that we have is, when will the latest books be available and where can they be purchased?
So, as far as Foundation is concerned, the Foundation book is live now. You can go to tsoshop.co.uk. That's our publishing partner, and I believe they offer both physical printed versions as well as links out to the Amazon Kindle store, iBook store. They offer PDF copies as well. You can also inquire directly with them for enterprise licensed copies of the book. And we'll be following that same partnership model when we launch Managing Professional and Strategic Leader modules in the second half of the year. So tsoshop.co.uk is the place to be.
Okay, great. Well, that's all the questions. Thank you, Akshay, for answering those. And thank you so much again for recording this webinar with us. For everyone who attended, hope you enjoyed it. I think if actually you could just put our contact details back up, yeah. So yeah, if you'd like to get in touch with us, all of our contact details are there if you want to know any more about ITIL 4 or if you want to book onto a course. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again, Akshay, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.